morning and welcome to Strictly Business. I'm your host, Penny Font. This webcast features conversations with Louisiana's most influential CEOs, entrepreneurs, and community leaders with the goal of providing insights, ideas, and inspiration to help you and your business grow. Strictly Business is brought to you by the East Baton Rouge Parish Library, Neighbors Federal Credit Union, and Exit Momentum. Without their support, this project would not be possible. Before we begin, here is a brief message from each of our sponsors.
The East Baton Rouge Parish Library believes that a thriving business community is good for us all. That's why we help entrepreneurs start businesses with tools like Gale Business Builder. Keep commerce rolling by providing access to computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi at 14 branch locations. Get a library card. Grow your business at ebrpl.com/business.
At Neighbors Federal Credit Union, we believe stronger schools build stronger communities. And with the generosity of our members and staff, we're making a difference. We've awarded 54 project grants, totaling over $220,000 for on-campus improvements. We've provided 99 scholarships worth nearly $300,000 to help dreams take flight. And through our mascot checking program, we've donated an additional $560,000 in unencumbered funds to local schools. Neighbors Federal Credit Union. We are neighbors helping neighbors.
We believe that entrepreneurs are the spark of creation and innovation, providing incredible value to the world. We believe that entrepreneurs have a calling to create and build and should be rewarded for the work that they do and the risks that they take. We believe in putting power back in the hands of the entrepreneurs so they can escape being trapped in the chaos of their business, showing them new ways to predict and protect what they've built.
Thank you all. We want to keep Strictly Business as interactive as possible. So for those joining us live, here's an icebreaker question for you. Submit your vote in the comments and the results will be posted at the end of the webcast. We're living in an environment of constant disruption, technological change, shifting demographics, a rapidly evolving workforce, and other forces. All of it is creating new challenges and new expectations for leadership. Whether you're navigating generational dynamics, anticipating market complexities, or trying to future-proof your organization, today's workplace is anything but predictable. Our guests today are two of the most respected voices on leadership and organizational strategy in Louisiana. Dr. Melissa Thompson is a leadership and organizational development expert known for transforming teams and organizational cultures. As a partner at Success Labs and curator of TEDx Baton Rouge, Melissa leverages her deep expertise in communication and leadership to help executives and emerging leaders navigate change and drive meaningful growth. Adrian Owen Jones is a nationally recognized leadership strategist and partner at Success Labs, where she helps organizations lead through change by building teams, systems, and strategies that bend without breaking. A LinkedIn top voice in strategy and philanthropy, Adrian brings a cross-sector background in tech, operations, and growth, spanning billion-dollar campaigns and award-winning workplace cultures. A former world-ranked gamer, she now applies that same systems thinking and agility to help leaders scale impact and future-proof their organizations from the inside out. Together, they're going to help us unpack the dynamics of volatile change and what today's C-suite needs to be doing to lead through it, both strategically and operationally. Melissa, Adrian, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you for having us. Here.
So we're living in a time of unprecedented change. The rules of leadership are shifting as quickly as the world around us. Technology is advancing rapidly, business cycles are tightening, and generational dynamics are reshaping how organizations function. So let's start with the big picture. The business environment has been described as increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. From your perspective, how has leadership fundamentally changed in the face of today's constant volatility? And what core leadership traits are most important for navigating rapid change? Melissa, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when I first started hearing about VUCA environments, it felt like something that happened every once in a while. And the last 5 years have felt like a constant VUCA environment. And so much has changed. It's required so much more of leaders to be more present and to invest in their people, to be ready for what's next, because it's not an if, it's a when. And I would say that the things that are most important for, in my mind, for leaders to consider is how they invest in their people and invest in relationships. And they need to put communication at the top of every priority list, because that is going to be the thing that's going to help people feel not so turbulent during a turbulent time, as if they can trust their leader and trust that communication.
Absolutely. Adrian, anything to add?
Yeah, the term VUCA comes from the military, and we have taken a lot of lessons around building resilient teams and resilient organizations from the military. And when we think about a VUCA environment, we look at 4 Ps. So Melissa named one of them, it's people, but I always say start with purpose. What is your true north? I think that standing the test of time really requires staying focused on that future vision and that purpose for why you're doing what you're doing. It's perspective. So don't sweat the small stuff, keep the big picture. It's people, like Melissa said, and wrapped up in that is how you communicate with them and how you build trust with them. And then the last one, the 4th P, is problem solving. And so problem solving just means being able to cut through that complexity, that ambiguity, and really continuing to deliver and drive outcomes. So we believe if you can stick to those 4 things, you're going to build a resilient leader and a resilient organization.
Great insights. Thank you.
Yeah.
Both of you have guided organizations through significant transformations. Can you share a pivotal experience in your career where you had to lead through a period of intense change or uncertainty? And also, what did you learn about effective leadership from that episode?
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm actually going to talk about a client that I'm helping currently that's experiencing a VUCA environment. And they have realized that in the past couple of years, they have grown at such a rapid rate that it is causing a lot of unintended consequences. I wouldn't say as bad as turmoil, but just that there feels like there's such whiplash within the organization, and things are moving so quickly that it's kind of hard to keep up. And what I've actually been brought in to help with some strategy work, but also even for team building, right? So one of the things that this organization, the individual teams are experiencing, the bosses are saying, my team seems a little disengaged, or they feel like I might be losing some people, not maybe permanently, or maybe just they're a little checked out. And we've been able to diagnose that they're in severe stages of burnout. And it's because of this rapid pace that they're experiencing. So some of the things that we've been working with them on is how to recognize burnout when it's at maybe a stage 1 instead of all the way to stage 3, or to recognize burnout and how to support their teammates. What it's doing simultaneously is helping the individual, but helping the team stay focused, and putting the concern of the person as the priority, rather than we just have to get our work done, right? Work still needs to happen, but you also have to take care of each other. And so the thing that I've learned through that is, even with the best of intentions, even when things are going right, even when VUCA means good things because it's associated with growth, that you can still experience negative outcomes or negative symptoms. And so we have to take care of each other as we change and as we grow and as we experience those VUCA environments.
I think a lot of companies can learn from that. Adrian, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have experienced this the majority of my career. I think, I've had rapid changing, volatile or ambiguous environments in both growth, growing. When I was at the LSU Foundation, we went from a $35 million a year run rate to a $100 million a year run rate in a really short amount of time. And then also in times of strife, COVID, I think, is the most easy one to think about, but just market volatility, and even working with clients going through that same thing. And I've noticed a common thread through both my personal experiences and those of my clients. And it's one, I truly believe culture eats strategy for lunch. So you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a solid team culture, around you, you're not going to be able to thrive. And so when I think about what makes a healthy culture, for me, it is like founded on trust. It is a strong foundation of trust that builds cohesion. It's transparency. I think that's everything from transparency with the finances, transparency with the strategy, transparency with succession planning, just transparency across the board. An understanding of the team's individual strengths. So if you've spent any time around me, you know I love Clifton's strengths, and I love understanding my own strengths, how to apply them to help the team, and helping team members understand their strengths so they can use them to help those around them. And then we've got to move to a decentralized leadership model. It's got to be like a team of teams, as Stanley McChrystal calls it. And so what that means is decisions aren't bottlenecked with one leader. It's people are empowered with autonomy across the team. So I think if to recap, trust, transparency, leveraging your strengths, and decentralized leadership is really how you build a team culture that can bend without breaking during times of uncertainty.
I love that. Let's talk about the accelerating pace of technology and how it's reshaping the competitive landscape.
Yeah.
So leaders aren't just responding to disruption anymore, they're expected to anticipate and lead through it. We've seen technologies like AI and automation emerge practically overnight. Adrian, how should executives keep their organizations competitive amid such rapid technological change, and what strategies help teams adapt quickly rather than get blindsided?
Yeah, this is such a complicated question. I think this is one of those that could be a whole episode in itself. The first thing that I thought of when I saw this question was this quote that says, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was, in times of turbulence, it's not the turbulence itself that gets organizations, it's acting with yesterday's logic. And so it's thinking that what worked yesterday is going to work today. And so I think that's where a lot of teams get it wrong, is chasing the next thing or not staying founded in that purpose. So there's a few strategies that I've seen adopted to kind of help with this. One, I say think about purpose before platform. So, what I mean by that is, why are we implementing this technology? Don't just adopt it to adopt it. Really understand what is the core need that you have, and then let that drive what the platform selection is or what the technology implementation is. I've seen that this can so go awry with the adoption of AI, right? Everybody's trying to rush to implement it, but they don't really understand what it's here for and what they need it for and how people should use it. And that's proliferating a whole host of problems, right? I think it's also recognizing that technology is not just a tool, it changes systems. So when I've done technology integrations with companies before, they don't realize that it's going to change your incentive structures. It's going to change your workflows. It's going to change the way that your company operates. So you need to recognize that it's going to be a system changer. It's not just a drop this thing in and the rest of the work goes on around it. And so you've got to really think about those downstream effects as you're thinking about technology implementation. So it's having that discernment to be clear on, like, what are we trying to do here? Is this really what we need? I'm going to keep going back to purpose. It's like you've got to stay rooted in your purpose as an organization and know, is this tool going to be an accelerator for us? If so, let's be really intentional in development. If not, you don't have to jump on the bandwagon just because something's really popular.
A lot of great points there. Melissa, a recent analysis found 92% of jobs now require digital skills, yet about 1/3 of workers lack basic digital fluency, which is a little bit stunning to me. How can companies bridge this digital skills gap?
I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to go in a roundabout way, if you don't mind. The thing that I ask often in leadership development workshops here at Success Labs, tell me about the best boss you've ever had, or tell me about the best mentor you've ever had. And they almost always, unless they've heard me and they know the trick to this question, will answer with things like, the best boss I ever had treated me like a person, or cared about me as a person. They allowed me to learn and let me fail and didn't pressure me to always win or always succeed. They let me learn from mistakes or things like that. They never say, the best boss I ever had was really good at ChatGPT, or the best boss I ever had, my goodness, you should see their budget. Like, it was beautiful, or their presentations were awesome. And so I think that we're talking about two different skill sets that are so mandatory and required, not just for a leader, but during a time of technology and innovation as well. You've got these technical skills, and you've got what I like to call people skills, or your people strategy, not just I don't like to call them soft skills, because I've got 3 degrees in soft skills, and I like to make sure that we give it the importance that it deserves. So when I think about the skills gap, I think about what are the technical skills that you need to develop and what are the people skills that you need to develop. And essentially, in order to bridge that skills gap, we have to invest in it. We have to make it a priority. You can't just say, go out and learn this on your own. It needs to be part of the learning culture. So what that would look like in an organization is, number one, put your money where your mouth is, like pay for training. Number 2, create an environment where curiosity can thrive. Mm-hmm. Ask questions. Don't always, as the leader, be expected to have the answer. You need to ask questions as well. And ask better questions, right? Deeper questions. When you're giving people feedback, and when they show curiosity, don't just say good job. Say, that's a really great idea. Where'd you come up with that? How can I encourage you? How can I support you to have more ideas like that? And I think if you create that culture of learning and culture of curiosity, it's going to help bridge that gap. And it needs to be supplemented with actual training as well. And that goes for the technological side or the people skills side.
Absolutely. One for both of you. In 1958, the average S&P 500 company lasted 61 years. Today, it's less than 18. So how do you foster innovation without destabilizing the core business?
Yeah. I'll go first on this one, Melissa.
Yeah,
if you're
go
good
ahead.
with that. Okay. Because I have thoughts about this. I think that longevity really requires the ability of your organization to, I'm going to say, maintain that core foundational purpose and values while evolving to whatever the demands of the day are, right? Like, your strategy is going to change, but the core business of what you do shouldn't change. That's something Devin always says. So how do you do that? One of the things that I used to drive my team crazy was saying, and I would even say this in the junior league, is iterate off the assembly line. And that's a phrase that I learned reading about Toyota. And what that means is by all means, you need to be fostering innovation, but don't let it interrupt the core foundational operations of what you're doing. You have to kind of set it aside and test and deploy elsewhere while you keep making perfect widgets on the assembly line. From there, you've got to have really clear criteria for what it takes to go from experimentation into integration. And so when I've done this with teams, we'll put together a rubric or a framework to say, is this really going to, again, going back to those downstream effects, have positive downstream effects for the team? And then that's where I'm going to go back to, you've got to practice that strategic discernment to say, is this really part of our long-term strategy? Steve Jobs is quoted with saying that innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And that was one of my greatest struggles working with certain leaders, is they would want to say, oh, what about this new framework? Or, oh, what about this new model? Or, oh, they're doing this, or, oh, they're doing that. And like my drumbeat was always like, how does this get us where we say we want to go? At the end of the day, are we still going to the same place? How does this get us there? And if you can just continue that drumbeat of, this is our true north, and that what you're trying to implement or change against that, you're going to be successful. And the people who can't weather that volatility are always chasing something other than that clear vision of where they're trying to go.
So relevant. Melissa?
Yeah, I have just a couple things to add, because I agree with everything that she said. The thing that I'm hearing, and I've experienced this with previous people that I've worked with and previous leaders of organizations I've been a part of, is that innovation can be confused with shiny object syndrome, like Adrian was talking about. Is this truly innovation because this is the next iteration of our company and our purpose and what we do and what we would provide for our clients or customers? Or is this like, I read this book or I heard this podcast and I want to jump on something new? So I think that discernment is really important. And then secondly, I would kind of ask, this is a rebuttal to the question of if companies used to last an average of 61 years and now it's closer to 8 or it's less than 18, is that a bad thing? What if companies don't need to be around anymore because they've served the purpose and came to completion on that? Or what if letting go of the current thing that you've been working on that no longer serves you or serves the mission or serves the people that you were providing something for would free you up to come up with the next new thing? And I don't, that doesn't mean I want, all major corporations to end as we know it, but sometimes things need to end so you can find a new beginning.
One of the greatest organizational challenges today is managing an increasingly diverse and multi-generational workforce. So let's unpack what that looks like and what it demands of leadership. For the first time, we have 4 or even 5 generations working together. So Melissa, what challenges and opportunities do you see in managing such a multi-generational workforce?
I'm smiling as you're asking this question because this has been one of the most common topics that I've been asked to come in and work with companies around. It feels like an insurmountable or unattainable goal to try to weave all these generations together and make sure that everybody's happy and productive. And I will say that yes, there are challenges, but there are just as many, if not more, opportunities. There are challenges around communication styles. There are challenges around motivation or what drives you. But there are also advantages that how cool, and maybe this is just the history lover in me, and like I try to capture, people's experiences. I did that with my grandmother. I always recorded her conversations before she died because I thought we needed to capture that. But how cool is it that I could learn from someone who is several decades older than me and learn from someone who is several decades younger than me? There are so many opportunities to understand different perspectives. One of the biggest challenges that I see is that with our older generations, there is so much institutional knowledge that is about ready to walk out they're long past ready, but they're actually getting to the point where they're about to walk out the door. And what are organizations doing to kind of future-proof that, or like the right kind of succession planning? So yeah, communication styles, motivation styles, they're different for every person, not just every generation. One thing there's a through line and a common thread with every single person on this planet. But there are some stereotypes of the different generations that are usually formed because of major life experiences, those formative experiences. I talk about how my senior year of high school was 9/11. My senior year of college was Hurricane Katrina. When I got out of grad school, it was the 2008 economic downturn. So every major life moment, or should have been major life moment, was met with something that disrupted the world as we knew it. And so those formative experiences change your motivations or what you're looking for in employment. And so we've got to know those things about our people and then work to connect the dots or connect the people. So it's not so much of a difference of, oh, you're a boomer or, oh, you're Gen Z, because we love to stereotype and put not so happy labels on those generations.
We do. You touched on this a little bit, but let's go a little bit deeper. How can companies leverage the unique strengths of each generation? Melissa, let's start with you.
Yeah, and I do want Adrian, since she is the Clifton Strengths expert around here, but one thing that I will say is that no matter the generation, there are similar strengths within each one of those. We put people into buckets, and Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but a lot of other countries don't talk about generations the way Americans do.
Yeah.
So we put boomers hate millennials and millennials hate boomers, or whatever it is. I think it's just because they created this monster as our parents. But there are so many similarities. And what I would say is you can take a group. I see this a lot in the students that I teach at LSU. I can take my 35 students this semester who are all in the same generation. But there's somebody that is an awesome communicator. There's somebody that is so great with coming up with these big picture ideas. And so as much as we want to harp on the differences between the generations, I think it still needs to come back to the individual. What is the individual's strengths? How can we leverage those for themselves and their own career path, but also how they can find that purpose and contribute to the team? And Adrian, I'd love to hear from your perspective.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. I feel like I have nothing more to add to that. I think that generations are not monoliths. I personally believe in looking at an individual's strengths. And I believe, generational diversity adds perspective, but individual strengths are what are really going to drive performance for the team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Melissa, you touched on baby boomers. They're choosing to work longer. How is this trend impacting succession planning and advancement for younger professionals? Adrian, let's start with you.
Okay, yeah. So by 2030, I think that workers 55 plus are going to make up 25% of the workforce. And boomers are the fastest growing percent of the workforce because they're staying in longer. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but traditionally people retired at 65 and they're not anymore, right? So that's, I think, what this question is really getting at. And so I see a few challenges with that. And as always, there are opportunities as well. But one of those is I think that mid-level leaders are not getting that strategic exposure to leadership that they need to be ready to step up. So when boomers stay in leadership longer, a lot of companies are not giving those early career mid-level leaders the opportunities to take on big strategic projects, or lead teams. So to me, that's again an opportunity. I'm working with a company right now that is hiring a director of operations that will become the COO in 2 years. And this person is just going to be shadowing the COO for 2 years. But they operate under a really high regulation, high safety, high impact culture. And so for them, it's going to be a lot more efficient to bring somebody in and have them just job shadow for 2 years at the executive level than it is to risk not having that knowledge transfer, not having that hand in glove work together and training on that discernment. I always say you've got to calibrate someone's discernment and ability to make the right call, because so much of it is contextual. And so you can learn that on the job when you're doing it the right way. And then the other thing that I see happening is just not doing good documentation. My systems mindset always goes back to invest in building a wiki, invest in documenting your core processes. And technology is making that so much easier right now. So it's like now is the time to have, good succession plans in place, good job shadowing available, elevate your mid-level leaders so they're getting exposure before it's critical, right? Have a safe space to learn, and you'll be set up for success.
I appreciate that story that you shared. Melissa, succession planning isn't about just preparing for who's next. It's about building leadership capacity at every level. And in many organizations, it's the weakest link. It's been said that you must start succession planning early and often, as Adrian kind of touched on. What are the risks of waiting too long?
Several. We have a company that we are working with, and I'll keep it confidential, but also kind of talk in round numbers just to give some scale and context. This is a plant that they looked up and said, for example, we have 100 operators, and over the next 5 years, 60 of them will be at or near retirement age, and we are not ready to backfill those positions. And so the risk of waiting to do succession planning, not just at the top of the organization, but throughout every level of the organization, is that you get to a moment where it's too late or it feels like it's too late. And so we have to, like you said, we have to start doing this early and often. And another thing that I will have seen that's interesting is two things. One, that as boomers delay retirement, what's happening is they're passing the reins when they finally do, mostly to millennials, not exclusively, but mostly. So there's a generation in between those two that we often forget that has a ton of knowledge, more experience potentially. And so we need to make sure that we're not just passing the reins to the millennials, but including all generations in that. And then the second thing that I've been seeing happen is that there seems to be, I've traveled out of the country enough to have gotten this and read enough about this, but there seems to be a particular attachment that we, in American society, that we wrap our value in ourselves, perceived value in ourselves, in our job title. And so then when it comes time to actually lose that job title, we have a really hard time with it, and nobody prepares you for that. And it's something that I've watched firsthand with my parents who've retired in the last several years. My dad especially struggled, I think, with this is who I am and what do I do now? And quite frankly, they're a little bored. And they're trying to figure out a way to still feel like they have value or that they can contribute to society in some capacity. So luckily, they've found some really great hobbies and are traveling more. But I think that we don't do enough to prepare the next wave of retirees for what that looks like. Not only from how do they protect the companies and safeguard against things becoming chaotic when they do leave, but just from a personal standpoint, how do we take care of those individuals as they transition to the next part of their life?
That is such a great point. Adrian, you've said one pitfall is letting a quote-unquote cult of personality form around a longtime leader. So how can organizations avoid that trap?
Yeah. So when I say cult of personality, what I really mean is when an organization becomes too dependent on a single leader, right? And you see this happen in startup culture. I think this happens a lot in nonprofit. I was talking about it on LinkedIn the other day, and somebody mentioned that just happens a lot in churches. And so I think there's a few things that can happen to prevent that, right? So that the organization isn't destabilized when that person leaves. One, you've got to distribute relational capital. And I think that's really hard for charismatic leaders, right? They like to be the one that knows everyone, but you have to be introducing other people on your team to key stakeholders, to vendors, to clients, building that relational capital throughout your team. You've got to document decision-making frameworks. So one of the things I see when I go into organizations is they know that a decision was made, but they don't know why. And so making sure everybody understands, the why behind the way things are done or were done is really critical for kind of bridging that gap. And then I think the last one is, I say this a lot about Success Labs, and I've said it at other places I've been, these days you almost need to be a brand of brands. And what I mean by that is you have to elevate multiple voices within the company. It's a good thing for Success Labs that I have my own kind of voice and perspective and following. It's a good thing that Melissa has her own voice and perspective and following. It's a good thing that you have your own voice and following, Penny, and do your own things. And Julio is completely separate from that, right? It builds credibility and resilience across the organization. So that way, if any one person does leave, there's still plenty of credibility and engendered goodwill within the organization.
Such great insight. What are some effective ways to build that bench strength in leadership? Adrian, you want to start? Go ahead, Melissa.
Okay, yeah. When I think about bench strength, we love a lot of sports references and metaphors, so I love this one. But I always think about people get so frustrated with the first time they try something, especially maybe stepping into a leadership role, that they're not automatically good at it. And I usually say, LeBron James, he was a prodigy. Tiger Woods was a prodigy, but they weren't great at the sport the first time they did something. And you see people progress. I love watching Olympic gymnasts and how they progress from the time that they were 4 to when they reach the Olympics. And those references help us because it reminds me that it's going to take multiple repetitions. You can't get strong at something overnight. You've got to build the muscle around it. And so it's having experiences before you even get to that leadership role. I always say when I'm coaching clients, when we're putting together individual development plans, what are the experiences that you need to have now to get ready for what's next in the future? That's taking away, we're not having a conversation about what do you need to do to get a promotion or to get a raise? It's not transactional like that. It's more about what are the experiences that you need to have? What meetings do you need to sit in? What things do you need to learn? What do you need to be exposed to get ready for when that time comes? So I think it has to happen early and often, like we've already mentioned several times.
I have a couple things I'll add to that really quick, just tactically. When I was working for a woman named Rachel Roy, she was fantastic at building bench strength. She really built, we called ourselves Team 6. And she used a framework called PI. And that was projects. So giving people meaningful projects that are advancing the company's goals. So one thing she'd say is, one of my goals for you every single year is to have a bullet for your resume of a thing you can be proud of. So giving people meaningful projects. Image. So she was very conscientious to say, you need to develop a professional image. You need to have, she'd say, put on a suit for the boardroom. She would guide us in having that kind of image necessary to step up and be ready to lead. And then exposure. So she would say, this is a pie moment. And what that meant was, this is your project. You're going to go present it. Make sure you look great. And she would give us the exposure for that. Put me in the boardroom. When I was only at the LSU Foundation in my third year, when I was still in my early 30s, but I was presenting to these titans of industry. It was a real opportunity for me to kind of get my sea legs in that way. And so that's I've always loved that framework. If you're thinking about how you're going to develop bench strength of your team, practice PIE, projects, image, and exposure.
That's a wonderful strategy. Yeah. So, Adrian, I want to continue with you. How transparent should succession planning be with employees?
Yeah, Melissa and I were talking about this yesterday because it's really complicated. It's complicated is the answer. I said in the beginning, I think that healthy organizations are transparent organizations. I feel strongly about that. That being said, you should only be as transparent as your culture allows. And it really depends on the maturity of the organization. So how familiar are they with succession planning? Do you have established career pathways? These are some questions you should ask yourself, right? How transparent have you been about the leaders that might be retiring? Are you thinking about succession planning beyond the C-suite? Melissa mentioned earlier, you've got to be looking at that mid-level. That's where most people skip, but that's kind of the most critical. So if you're not answering affirmatively to those things, I think you should wade very carefully into succession planning and do it very intentionally and probably bring in a partner to support you in that work. But if you've been building out a culture that has development paths, that has talked about succession planning openly, when I was at the LSU Foundation, give this example, it was very clear. Rob would always say, Chris is going to take over this place. I'm just going to stay as long as I'm not in the way. And he was very transparent about that. And that worked for our culture because then we all knew what was expected of us. But that's not going to be the case everywhere. So you've got to know yourself. You've got to know your culture. And default to transparency.
Absolutely. Melissa, we've touched on this a little bit. What role does mentorship play in developing future leaders and managing those generational handoffs?
It plays a huge role. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we think about mentorship, we only think about the oldest person or the most seasoned person mentoring the younger or less experienced. And I think that if we stop there, it's a missed opportunity. There's so much that we can also learn from people that have less experience than we do, but that meaning in number of years, but they have different experiences. So I think when you think about mentorship, it needs to be the traditional mentorship of a leader and a younger person or a newer person, and then the opposite. It has to be that reverse mentorship as well. And I think that requires a leader that has they're not worried about ego. They're not worried about looking like they have all the answers all the time. They have to be comfortable asking questions. They also have to be willing to put in the time and effort. I think that there's nothing better and more meaningful, at least to me. I don't know if maybe I'm just a nerd like this, but there's nothing more meaningful than when somebody says, I want to teach you this thing, because that means that they're stopping to spend time with me. And time is the only resource that is truly unrenewable. We can't get it back. So I think we have to think about how we spend our time and how we invest in them, and not just make it willy-nilly. There needs to be a plan. You need to say, let's meet once a month, every month, and we'll talk. You can ask questions. I can ask questions to have that reverse mentorship. Put it on the calendar and don't skip it. There is nothing more deflating than when you've got somebody that believes in you, that you feel is a big deal, that they want to invest in you, and then they cancel on you. I get that that's inevitable every once in a while, but it's showing what's more important, something else or your future. And so we have to do that. We have to hold firm to making those plans.
Behind every strong leadership transition is a resilient company culture, one that doesn't just weather change, but grows from it. So let's talk about how you build that. Melissa, how do you measure the success of leadership development and succession initiatives?
So when I hear the word measure, my mind automatically goes to metrics. So that feels very quantitative in nature. And you can definitely test for that, right? Like do a pre-test and a post-test for any kind of leadership development initiative or succession planning. But also I think that there's a qualitative component that can't be forgotten. Some of the things that I would say is to have conversation with the people involved. How does this feel? Right. And I know it might sound different than from the business community that we talk about our feelings. But I think getting people's input and buy-in and perspective is really a healthy exercise. I would also try to measure how many times have we been reactive to something rather than proactive. There are times where things in an organization are going to be wild and you don't have time to stop and think. And then you're also going to have slow periods. And those slow periods are the really good times where you can stop and reflect. How are we doing this? How can we get prepared for what's coming next? So I think having those ebbs and flows is actually really helpful. But what are the qualitative, do we have a company culture that rewards and supports growth in the individual or curiosity? What kind of culture do we have that do we put our money where our mouth is with leadership development? Or when there's succession initiatives that are happening, are we transparent about not only the what, but the why and the how? What are we doing this for? Why are we doing this? And then what is this actually going to look like? How are we going to implement this with actual tactics? So when measuring it, I think it needs to be qualitative and quantitative. It needs to happen before, during, and after. And we need to not be so afraid of, yes, we need to talk about the bottom line and how these things are affecting the bottom line, but also how it's affecting the individual and how do we feel about it as well. Because when you have all of those conversations, it seems to me, in my experience, that everyone is more engaged and everyone is rowing in the same direction. We know where we're going.
Continuing on that, how important is culture in navigating workplace volatility? Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier, I think culture eats strategy for lunch. I mean, I think culture is everything. And, you know, I think there's a few things that go into that. I think it starts at the top. I was just writing about that this week of, you know, you can say these are our company values, but if your leadership isn't living them out, then that's going to foment mistrust. That's going to signal a lack of authenticity. You know, I think teams that have strong trust rooted in values and clear purpose, teams that are transparent, teams that really foster collaboration. And I talked about this earlier, but that collaboration is driven by autonomy, you know, and no longer, you know, a command and control mentality doesn't work anymore, right? So teams that, you know, have trust, transparency, and that collaboration and autonomy, I think are the ones who can, you know, I always say bend without breaking. So yeah, I think that your strategy will shift, but culture is what's going to sustain.
Speaking of transparency, Melissa, what communication strategies do you recommend during major periods of organizational change?
Given my education and background, this is one of those questions that could be an entire an entire episode. But I would, to succinctly answer this one, or as succinctly as I can, I'll go back to what I just mentioned in a previous question. You need to communicate the what, the why, and the how, and make that as clear as possible. I like to refer back to Brene Brown, who said, "Clear is kind and unclear is unkind." And that goes for delegation or talking about organizational change and chaos. More specifically, I think it's what I would say to leaders that this cannot, should not, and it just cannot be you in a room by yourself coming up with the strategy. And even more importantly, coming up with the communication plan for that strategy. You have to invite other people into the room. If for nothing else, that your perspective, your reality is only your reality. There may be other people that see things differently than you. We need to have other people in the room to check for our blind spots or check for different ways of thinking. We talk about this with Myers-Briggs profiles. I'm a thinker and not a feeler. That's not, so I start the decision-making process and a lot of my communication from the black and white bottom line. How do I think with my head first? It doesn't mean that I'm callous and don't think about people. I just don't go there first. So I need a feeler in the room with me when I'm creating the communication plan to make sure that I understand how to communicate this in a way where the majority will understand, accept it, and be fired up to enact whatever that change is.
Melissa, let's continue with you. What are the signs that your organization is experiencing change fatigue, and how can leaders give teams breathing room without losing momentum?
That's a great question. And it's, I'll give an example from a client that I'm working with, and I talked about earlier in the episode, that they are changing so fast that the change fatigue, I think that's synonymous with burnout. And the burnout that they're seeing, in fact, I just completed a workshop a couple weeks ago for a team within that organization. And I said, why are you calling me to come in and why are you spending money on this? And he said, I feel like people are pulling away. I feel like my best workers are now not doing their best. I can see that they look tired. There's more people calling out sick. He listed a whole long list of symptoms of what was going on. And so I went in and I had a presentation created of like, here's how you spot burnout. And we went through it. But the most helpful part of the exercise was the 30 minutes at the end that I held and said, what are your takeaways? Thinking that they would come up with something that they wanted to enact the next day or whatever. But it became almost like a group therapy session where everybody said, this is what I feel like, this is what I'm experiencing. And just to have, like one person in particular said, I feel like I have to answer every email that y'all send me right when I see it. And sometimes that's at midnight, sometimes that's at 4 a.m., whatever it is. And her boss heard that and said, I had no idea that I was putting that amount of pressure on you via an email that I just remembered, so I needed to get it out. I'm going to stop doing that. And it was such a cathartic exercise for them to be able to connect with each other and talk about this in a safe space. And I think that conversation was so powerful because first and foremost, they've created a space where it's okay to be vulnerable. They wouldn't have had that conversation, I don't think, unless it was facilitated and it was in a group setting. But it was actually a really beautiful thing to see. And so as we transitioned away from talking about burnout and how to support each other, they got really clear on some boundaries that they needed to create. And they said them out loud to each other, and they committed to doing them. And I think that as they continue to experience all of this volatility and change, that is still very positive change. It's a good thing, but I think that they're going to be able to hold firm in taking care of each other and holding true to the purpose like Adrian's been talking about this whole episode. So I'm hoping that will stick. They may need some periodic reminders, but and I'm happy to go work with them again. But that's what I'm seeing with this just rapid change all the time. It can really throw you into chaos and burnout really quickly.
So what are some ways companies can foster a culture of continuous learning across the organization? Adrian?
Yeah, I've done this several times throughout my career, and I think it's you've got to be intentional about it, right? So, one of the ways that we did it is developing intentional career pathways. So we put incentives to it, right? So we said, if you go and get these certifications and you advance your career, not only are you going to get a bonus, but you're going to be eligible for, the next round of leadership within the organization. I said it earlier, but you have to model it in your leadership and be transparent about it. So I'm always sharing what I'm learning. And when I'm leading teams, I'm always saying, oh, can you show me how to do that? And so making it a safe space to learn and really holding that as a value. So we would do some tactical things we would do to facilitate that. We would do teach backs. So we would let team members say, hey, here's, we'd ask the question at the start of a team meeting, what's the last thing you learned? Or we'd say, Sean wants to show a new, script that he wrote or whatever. We would do book clubs, all kinds of things like that. So I think that leaders have a lot that they can do in building that effective learner culture.
I love that. Let's continue with you for a minute, talking about technology as AI takes over more routine decisions. What becomes more important in the role of a leader?
I love that question. So when I think about the skills that are going to be critical for not only adapting technology, but adapting to kind of the rapid pace of change with technology. I'll put it in that bucket. I think there's two really critical things. One is learning agility. I talked about it earlier. And by learning agility, I mean the ability to learn and unlearn and relearn. There's this quote that the illiterate of the future won't be those who can read and write, but will those who can no longer learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so I think it's got to be a learner mindset. And then, the other thing is, I've talked about this before, Melissa said at the very top, communication. And what that looks like in a technology context is, I've said, really effective delegation, right? It's not only being able to communicate what you need to your team and what the goals are and what the purpose is, but it's also really effective communication with technology. So I'm working with a team right now who is running multiple AI models at the same time to execute a project. So they're testing out this idea of kind of AI employees. And what they've learned is they will go down a rabbit hole and go completely off the rails and become self-reinforcing of an unproductive pathway that that's a flag of where there needs to be oversight. There needs to be leadership of these technologies to come in and say, okay, I see that you keep saying this is the problem, but it's actually not the problem. So I need you to rethink the way that you're approaching this. You're going to have to get comfortable talking to AI in the same way that you do an employee, and coaching and course correcting and providing that oversight. And I think that, as part of that, you've got to maintain technical domain expertise. You're not going to be able to, I wouldn't be able to tell if a piece of code is off track if I don't know the software or whatever, but they need to have people on the team that are dedicated to doing that. And so recognizing that, I still don't believe AI is just going to wholesale replace people, but people are going to have to learn how to work differently. And communication skills are going to be more critical than ever, and learning agility is going to be more critical than ever.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, let's kind of bring everything together and talk about some things that leaders could act on right now. So the first question, what's the most common form of resistance to change you see in organizations, and how should leaders address it? Melissa, let's start with you.
Yeah, some of the most common forms of resistance that I'm seeing are, again, tied to, during this transition time, it's tied to ego, or it's tied to thinking that they have to know all the answers. And I think that if we only ever think about what we know, we block ourselves from the opportunity to learn, as Adrian was just talking about, learning, unlearning, and relearning. I think that's incredibly important, that we're not expected to know everything. So how should we address it is to just keep that culture of learning at the forefront. Yeah. And then two things that I say over and over and over, and I've already mentioned them at the top of this episode, and I'll reiterate them now. It's, you've got to communicate. You've got to constantly think about who you're communicating with and for, not at. Yeah. And then secondly, invest in people and relationships before you need them. I tell my students this all the time. You've got to build up a roster of people that you can ask for advice. Or, I say, if you're asking someone to write a letter of recommendation for you for grad school and it feels awkward to ask, then you didn't do enough to invest in that relationship beforehand. And so build the relationship before you need it, so it feels so much less transactional. Those things can help get rid of that friction that can happen when there's leadership changes or VUCA environments, or when things just feel a little off course.
Yeah. And I've got one thing to add to that is, I think I said this earlier, but the old way of command and control is hard for people to let go of. And I think a lot of organizations still operate off of a need-to-know basis. So just like Melissa was saying, communication is key. I think transparency is key. I like to say you have to go from chess master to gardener. You're not trying to control every piece on the board anymore. You have to be creating an ecosystem where every employee can thrive and contribute and add value in their own way.
A great handbook right there, just in that one question. Adrian, if you could offer one key piece of advice to fellow executives about future-proofing their organization's leadership, what would it be?
I mean, it's so easy. It's so easy for me because I think it's going back to those 4 Ps at the beginning. I think future-proofed organizations are rooted in purpose or their true north. They've got a really solid perspective. So they're not sweating the small stuff. They're thinking strategically. They're thinking about their people. They're developing them. I mean, the one piece of advice, invest in your people development. Invest in developing your people. And then it's problem solving. It's being agile and adaptive with your technology, but being really intentional and strategic with how you use it. So follow the 4 Ps, and you'll be an agile and resilient organization.
Great. Melissa, close us out.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that we are not the first people to experience this, and we will not be the last. So along with the 4 Ps, investing in your people, problem solving, gaining perspective, all of those things that Adrian mentioned, I think we need to remember that somebody's done it before us. So go ask them, for advice or support. And then when you receive that and it's your turn to pay it forward, don't leave anybody hanging, because there's going to be somebody that's going to need this after you. So I think that we can be a resource and be a question asker all the time. Never stop learning.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and at the center of it all is one idea. Organizations that thrive in volatile times are the ones that invest in people, plan for the future, and stay agile through it all. A huge thank you to Dr. Melissa Thompson and Adrian Owen Jones for sharing your insight and practical wisdom with us today. Your work at Success Labs is clearly helping organizations navigate these challenges with clarity.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Penny.
And thanks also to our viewers for tuning in, as well as our sponsors, Neighbors Federal Credit Union, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library, and Exit Momentum for making this experience possible. Please join us again for the June 19th episode of Strictly Business. Until then, on behalf of our show's director, Tim Coles, and me, enjoy and make your day a great one.